This is episode 32 of the Relentless Man podcast, Tao Te Ching, part 7. Hi, and welcome to the Relentless Man podcast. I'm your host, modjaiso, and my goal is to help men die empty, to make sure that you die having used up every ounce of potential that is trapped within you. However, to help you die empty, I'll have to be very raw and brutally honest with you. So if you're easily offended, stop listening. If you're easily triggered, stop listening. If you can't handle explicit language, stop listening. If you are fragile, stop listening. Otherwise, let's dig in. Before we begin this episode, I'd like to urge you not to blindly copy or implement anything that I say in this podcast episode. Rather, what I recommend is that you turn on your brain, that you think for yourself, and that you make sure that every decision that you make is a product of your own thinking and decision-making process. Remember, do not be a follower, be a student. Now, as has been mentioned before, we're continuing in our series of episodes on the Tao Te Ching. And the Tao Te Ching is a spiritual text written by an enlightened master. And we're going to continue discussing and thinking more about this text. But naturally, if you haven't been following the previous episodes, you may be asking yourself, well, why is it important for me as a relentless man to learn the Tao Te Ching? The most obvious reason is just for tactical reasons. That is, the principles in the Tao Te Ching are the sorts of principles that if you learned and you're able to apply, you'd be able to do anything that you're doing much better. And if you're a relentless man, it's very likely that you have a craft. There is something you're trying to master. Maybe you're trying to master dance. Maybe you're trying to master a certain musical instrument. Maybe you're trying to master a certain sport. Maybe you're trying to master listening to people or social skills. Whatever craft it is you're trying to master, well, that craft, you'll be able to master it much better if you actually are able to learn and apply the principles of the Tao Te Ching. So that's one reason to listen and work with the ideas in this episode, is they'll help you on a tactical level to do whatever you're doing much better than you're doing it right now. However, the primary reason for learning about the Tao Te Ching and the principles in the Tao Te Ching is that it tackles the most fundamental question that every human must answer. The question, who am I? That is not a trivial question. And the answer that you've been told is actually not the true answer. You've probably been told that who you are is John, and who you are is a male, and who you are is maybe a student of a certain subject, maybe, or who you are is like your job position at a workplace. But I venture to tell you that that is not who you are. That is not an accurate representation of what you are. And so the Tao Te Ching is important because it enables you to tackle this question, to understand for yourself who you are. It turns out that I actually cannot tell you who you are. I know who I am, and even who I am, I can't really tell you who I am. It's the sort of thing that one discovers for himself. And the hope is that as we go through these ideas in the Tao Te Ching, you'll be triggered enough to think for yourself and eventually realize who you are. Because once you understand who you are and what you're truly capable of, that's when the relentless journey really begins. That's when you'll be able to perform to the best of your ability. That's when you'll be able to die empty. And that's when you'll be able to massively impact those around you and the world as a whole. So let's dig into this text. We're now in the 8th verse of the Tao Te Ching. And so let's read the first stanza. It says, "The supreme good is like water, which nourishes all things without trying to. It is content with the low places that people disdain. Thus, it is like the Tao." So a natural question here is, the first part of it says the supreme good is like water. So a natural thing to think about is, well, what is the supreme good? In this case, the supreme good is standing for the Tao. And what's the Tao? The Tao is basically the essence of life itself. However, the Tao is something that we can't really describe clearly or capture in words and terminologies. The only thing we can do is look at its various manifestations. One of the manifestations and interpretations of the Tao is that it is the essence of life itself. You could think of the Tao as darkness, infinite intelligence, infinite wisdom. It's the place from which inspiration comes. That's one way to think about the Tao. And in this case, the supreme good is being used to represent the Tao, because the Tao is also infinite goodness. And so the supreme good, in this case, being used to represent the Tao. And they're saying that the supreme good is like water. Okay, so what do we know about water? Why is the Tao like water? Well, I mean, no one has ever seen water struggling or pushing, or water that, have you ever seen water trying to do something? Water is just itself. If you block the water, it just stops moving. If it sees an opening, it pursues the opening and flows through the opening. If it's on a tilted level, if it's on a tilted surface, the water flows down the slope. The water is completely itself. And the water doesn't try to do anything. It doesn't try to be anything that it's not. And in particular, what the water does is that it nourishes. That's the second part of the stanza. It says, the supreme good is like water, which nourishes all things without trying to. So, I mean, think about all the uses that water has in our lives. We need to drink water. We need water in order to irrigate the soil and grow plants. Basically, if we didn't have water, we wouldn't have food. A huge chunk of our planet is made up of water. Water is where the fish live, and fish is one of the delicious meals that we eat. So water is really important. In fact, water is one of those things that is able to sustain all of us as human beings. But you see, the water never tries to sustain us. In a sense, the water is simply itself. And because it's itself, it's able to nourish us. And that's what the verse says here, is that the supreme good is like water, which nourishes all things without trying to. Whenever you try to do something, it indicates a sort of struggle. It indicates a sort of a push. Right? If you're working in accordance, what this part of the stanza is saying is that if you're working in accordance with the laws, kind of like water water operates by the laws of water. It's in harmony with them. And that's why it never seems to try anything. It just flows. In the same way, whatever it is that you're trying to do as a relentless man, maybe you're trying to be a physicist. Okay, you're trying to be a physicist. Well, if you try to be a physicist, it's going to be very hard for you to succeed, or at least you're going to take more time than you need to take in order to become a physicist. Rather, you don't try to become a physicist. What you do is you figure out the laws by which a physicist is created, and you work in accordance with those laws. You might discover that to be a great physicist, you need to understand mathematics. Maybe you'll realize that the first thing maybe you need to understand is algebra. So, well, you've now identified one of the laws of becoming a physicist. So you look at algebra and you think about, well, algebra, what's algebra made up of? It's made up of maybe a concept about, well, working with unknowns. So maybe you start working on unknowns. And if you work in accordance with the nature of physics, in accordance with the nature of the laws of the subject, then you are able to accomplish a lot without doing anything, without trying to do anything, because you're working in accordance with how things work. And in particular, what this is also saying is that just as there are laws of nature, you also have a nature. And your nature is not necessarily your physical traits, or maybe you have a strong right hand, so that's you're naturally a good boxer, or maybe you have a high IQ, so you're naturally a good thinker, or maybe you get along really well with people and you think that's your nature. Nature is something much deeper. Your nature is really that life force that animates you, that force that brings you alive. And in particular, what this verse is saying is that if you're in line with your true nature, and you can always sense when you're in line with your nature or not. Usually, if you're doing something that's not in line with your nature, you experience a lot of discomfort. You're going to experience depression, sadness, anxiety. All those are usually signs that you're not working in accordance with your nature. When you're truly in accordance with your nature, you're happy, you're fulfilled, you're content. And what Lao Tzu here is saying is that if you work in accordance with your nature, if you don't try to be something else, if you don't try to be someone else, if you become truly yourself, then you'll find that you nourish without trying to nourish. And what does nourishment mean for you? Well, if you're a relentless man, it means you have a craft. You are born on the planet, and you have a job to do on the planet. In order to do that job effectively, you'll just need to become yourself. When you truly become yourself, whatever you do, you'll do it to the best of your ability. And when you do it to the best of your ability, you'll be able to impact the people that your work is supposed to impact. If you're a writer, then the only way you're going to truly become a great writer is by becoming yourself, by channeling your own voice and speaking what is truly within you. But when you do this, when you become yourself, that's when your books will have the most impact on people. And that's kind of what Lao Tzu is getting at here is the supreme good is like water, which nourishes all things without trying to. It is content with low places that people disdain. Thus, it is like the Tao. So he's talking about water. Water is content with low places that people disdain, right? So water actually doesn't have any, does water have any desires? Well, obviously not, right? It's, at least as far as we can see, water doesn't seem to have any desires. Water is content wherever you place it. If you place water on a table, it stays on the table. If you give it an opening, it flows. If you flush water in the toilet next to shit, water allows itself to be flushed. It's content with wherever you place it. It's happy with its current situation. And it doesn't mind being in low places that other people don't want to be in right now. I mean, no one really wants to. Few people, I can't think of many people who want to be like spending the entire day, like let's say, I don't know, like rolling in the dirt. Okay. But that's exactly what water does. Water has no problem rolling in the dirt. Few of us would want to spend our time, let's say, in shit. But our toilets, basically, water flushes the toilets and the water is content staying in shit. And now this verse is paradoxical. It's saying that it is content with the low places that people disdain. Thus, it is like the Tao. So basically, what Lao Tzu here is saying is that because the water is okay with being in places that no one else wants to be, it is more like the Tao. And what is in turn is suggesting is that as a relentless man, if you're content being below, if you're content doing those things that people hate to do, if you're content facing the discomfort that other people do not want to have, then you're like the Tao. Then that's where you truly become yourself, right? Because you have a piece of the Tao in you. And when you become like the Tao, you become yourself. And so here what Lao Tzu is talking about is that as a relentless man, you're going to need to do things that are uncomfortable. You're going to need to do things that are hard. You're going to need to do things that people don't want to do. Right? What does that mean? Let's pick an example. Let's say you want to become a basketball player. You want to become a great athlete in terms of like playing basketball. Well, what does it take to become a great basketball player? You have to do a heck of a lot of work. In particular, it's very likely, I think I was listening to people like Kobe Bryant, the basketball player, talking about how when he used to practice every day, he'd make sure that he doesn't go to bed if he hasn't made 500 shots or some number. Like, I'm not sure about the number, but it was a really huge number. So think about it for a while. Every single day, you're making 500 baskets. How many people do you know who are willing to sacrifice family life, sacrifice playing with people, sacrifice meals and diet, sacrifice their time and sit in a court with nobody and just shoot 500 baskets? That is something that many people disdain to do. But if you are the sort of person that's able to stay in the court when no one is there, when everybody has gone home and they're having a good time, if you're able to stay there and make 500 baskets day after day, month after month, year after year, then you become like the Tao. You become yourself, and you are able to harness with the basketball capacities within you. And this is true of any craft that you really have. You want to have a better understanding of people. Well, that means you're going to have to spend an insane amount of time with people. In particular, you might have to spend an insane amount of time with people that you don't approve of, people that you find really annoying. Because if you're able to be comfortable, and if you're able to not lose your cool in front of people that annoy you and disagree with you, then that's a sign that you've truly mastered the rules of social behavior. That means you've really learned how to control yourself. But you see, the only way to really gain that kind of self-control is to subject yourself time and time again to uncomfortable people who hate you, people who are trying to do you harm. And this is particularly the sort of position people don't want to be in. Most people are trying to avoid people they don't like. Most people are trying to avoid people they disagree with. Most people are trying to avoid people who hate them. But if you move towards people who hate you, you're doing something that most people disdain. But in doing that time and time again, by putting yourself in a low position that no one wants to be in, you become like the Tao. You become yourself. You discover within yourself your social potential. You discover your potential to connect with people. And this is what Lao Tzu is saying here, is that the supreme good, the Tao, is like water, which nourishes all things without trying to. It is content with low places that people disdain. Thus, it is like the Tao. The next stanza says, in dwelling, live close to the ground. In thinking, keep to the simple. In conflict, be fair and generous. In governing, don't try to control. In work, do what you enjoy. In family life, be completely present. So let's look at the first line of that. In dwelling, live close to the ground. What does Lao Tzu mean by this? Yeah, I'm not sure what Lao Tzu means by indwelling, live close to the ground. Maybe he's suggesting, I don't know, so here I'm going to really speculate. Maybe he's suggesting that if you look at a building, the most stable place in the building is going to be the bottom of it. The top is the most unstable place. So if you're on top, then you're more unstable. And in particular, if let's say you fall from the top, then the injury from falling from the top will be much more severe than if you are closer to the bottom, because the bottom is closer to the ground and thus is more stable. So maybe what Lao Tzu is talking about in this line is that in dwelling, in this case, dwelling is not just living in a place, but it's more of in living, like living life. In dwelling, in living, stay close to the ground. That is, when you're living, try to stay stable. What does it mean to stay stable? Staying stable, for example, a relentless man means that you don't want to be so pushed by your emotions. You don't want to be swayed by your emotions. If, for example, someone, let's say, calls you fat, he tells you you're fat, and you become emotionally engaged in what he's saying, and you become engrossed and attached to those kinds of emotions, the end result is that you become unstable, because once you start thinking, oh wow, he called me fat, maybe I really am fat, how dare him call me fat, etc. Once you get into that negative loop of thinking, you are no longer present. You're no longer able to sit down, detach, and observe and see things clearly. Because when you're able to detach and see things clearly, we say you're stable. You're dwelling close to the ground. But if you're too emotional, if it's very easy for you to be destabilized by a few phrases or comments that people make, then you're in trouble. You're not really going to be able to realize your true potential, because part of dying empty, part of being relentless is mastering your emotions. You will not be able to go very far if you can't master your emotions. And mastering your emotions is about not taking your emotions too personally. It's about not taking everything personally or what people do to you personally. It's more about when people say negative things to you, when you find a trigger in your life, something that triggers a negative emotion in you, rather the wise thing to do is to detach from whatever it is, whatever the situation is. Someone just insulted you, you detach. You don't take the insult personally. By detaching, you're able to observe the insult. When you observe the insult, you're present. You no longer think about, oh, how bad the insult was, what did that person mean, how horrible that person is. You're completely present. And when you're present, you're stable, because you're not being swayed by your emotions. You're in control. You're observing the emotions. And when you stay close, when you dwell close to the ground in this way, that's when you're able to truly make things happen. That's when you're able to control, or at least have some impact on the situation. And obviously, if you are able to control your emotions, if you're able to dwell close to the ground day after day, year after year, then the sorts of things you'll be able to achieve as a relentless man will be remarkable. And the next stanza says, that's why he says, indwelling, live close to the ground. The next line of the stanza says, in thinking, keep to the simple. Well, this line makes more sense because usually anytime, have you ever met someone who, they'll spend an hour trying to explain to you something, trying to give you all the details, when it's the sort of thing that they could have told you in 1 sentence or 5 minutes. Someone spends an hour explaining something that they could have explained in 5 minutes. Usually when you have someone that is using too many words, that's overcomplicating things, well, that's a sign that they don't really understand what they're talking about. That's a sign that they're not really a sophisticated thinker. Because a sophisticated thinker, someone who's very good at thinking, is the sort of person that can take a very complex idea and make it very simple. In fact, the ability to explain things simply is a sign of clear thinking. And that's what the Lao Tzu is talking about here. And of course, as a relentless man, you have massive projects. You're trying to do things that are impossible, things that have never been done before. You have huge projects. Maybe your project is you want to figure out how to make a machine process emotions as well as a human being. Let's say that is your main goal right now. That's what you're trying to do. In order to achieve such a massive project, you're trying to make an emotionally intelligent machine. To do that, it's unlikely you're going to do it alone. You're going to need a lot of people working on different aspects. You might need some people working on the technical aspects of the machine. You might need some people maybe who are experts in psychology to tell you about emotions. You may need to maybe consult a Zen monk to tell you about the nature of emotions, etc. The point is you'll have to need lots of people in order to realize such a massive project of making an emotionally intelligent machine, a machine that's as emotionally intelligent as a human or better, let's say. But you see, in order to perform such a project, if you're going to need a lot of people, then it means that you're going to need to be a good communicator. You're going to need to get complex ideas and explain them to all the people that you're working with. And the only way to do this is to be a clear thinker. Because if you're a disorganized thinker who complicates everything, well then you're not able to communicate effectively your ideas to the people that you're working with. And if you don't communicate effectively, people are not going to understand what you're saying. If they don't understand what you're saying, they're not going to do the best job they could have done. And the end result is that the project will not be as good as it could have been. And that's why it's super important. If you're going to achieve a massive project, and that's what you're trying to do if you're a relentless man, it means that you're going to need to do things you're going to need to collaborate with a lot of people. And collaboration means that you need to become good at communicating. And good communication implies thinking clearly and explaining things in the simplest way possible. And we admire simplicity very much. There is something seductive and attractive about someone who can, in 3 minutes, give you everything you need to know, as opposed to giving it to you in 3 hours. Because in 3 hours, you've lost concentration, etc. And there's a sense in which simplicity is, in a sense, the essence of life, right? The Tao is, in a sense, simplicity. So, what sorts of products do we admire most? Let's say computers or phones. Well, the best phones right now are the phones that have a minimum number of buttons. If you look at the current iPhone that we have, I think it's iPhone 6 or 7. The iPhone right now has maybe how many buttons? 1, 2, maybe 4 buttons, right? And it's energy efficient. That is, you don't need to tell it to go off. When you're not using it, it goes off on its own. It's the sort of device that you don't need an instruction manual to use. If I gave you an iPhone and you've never used one before, just by playing around with it, you'll be able to figure out what it does. That is, for the time when that was one of the simplest phones that were ever made by humankind. And because it was so simple, it attracted so many people. It became more people were able to use it. And that was what was part of the most attractive thing about the phone, was its simplicity. So that concept of simplicity is true in technology, it's true in explaining ideas, it's true in science ultimately. Think about some of the greatest breakthroughs in physics. So, for example, Albert Einstein is really revered by physicists for his helping us understand the nature of space and time. In particular, in helping us understand the relationship between energy and mass. But why is his work so exciting? Part of the reason it's so exciting is because he got a complex concept like energy and a complex concept like mass and was able to connect those two ideas using just one equation, E equals mc squared. 3 letters, and within those 3 letters, you're able to explain a heck of a lot about energy and mass. The fact that energy and mass are equivalent. And obviously, the physics might not be as important to you, but the idea is that part of the reason we celebrate Einstein is because he was able to explain so much with so little. That is, he embraced the notion of simplicity. And this is something that if you're not doing right now, I recommend that you start doing. I recommend that you try to simplify everything that you do. If you have a code of conduct, we talked about code of conduct before, try to write your code of conduct in as simple a way as possible. And I guess this is also core, it's important to mention here, is the idea that if you're a relentless man, well, first of all, I believe that every human being was born to do something. You were born to do something on the planet. Part of clarity, part of enabling you to be relentless is trying to figure out, you might not discover it in a sense, but if you actually start pushing towards your interests, eventually you'll discover what it is that you were born to do. And when you become really good, if you're a clear thinker, you need to get to the point where you're able to summarize the mission of your life in a phrase, a sentence. So for example, in my case, the mission of my life is to help men die empty. That's the phrase. That phrase captures my mission in life. And it's a simple idea that I can state clearly, explain to others, and it enables me to prioritize my life in a very clear way. Everything I'm doing, a simple question. Is this helping men die empty or not? If it's not helping men die empty, I don't do it. If it's helping men die empty, I do it. Being able to simplify and write down my life, the goal of my life in one sentence, really makes my life clear. It declutters it. It helps me to decide really quickly what I need to do, what to do and what not to do. And that's another sense when simplicity is important. It makes living much easier than if you have in every moment to figure out, what should I do this or should I not? It's much easier to do it if you have a simple mission statement for your life. So that's something I recommend doing, but ultimately you may figure out a better way to do things. All right, we've beaten this horse too much. Let's move on to the next line. It says, in conflict, be fair and generous. Okay, so what does Lao Tzu mean by this? Well, usually when we're in conflict, let's say someone is like, let's say, what's a typical really great conflict? Oh, sure, modern time divorce, okay? 2 people are married and then all of a sudden they have a divorce, right? That's a conflict, right? Usually, if the people are completely unconscious and they're not really well controlled, what happens is that both parties hate each other. The man thinks the woman is crap and talks about how inadequate the woman is. The woman talks about how inadequate the man is. They're fighting and they get to the point where they're not even able to sit in the same room. Well, that's a sign of not being able to handle conflict effectively. So what Lao Tzu here is talking about is even when you're in conflict, even when you're, let's say, going through a divorce, you still want to be fair and generous. So for instance, sure, you don't like someone, you don't agree with someone, whatever someone says is, let's say, completely abominable to you, sure. But still, you don't want to demonize the person. You don't want to treat the person like crap. You don't want to shut them down. You don't want to be completely unfair to them, try to get them arrested, try to discredit them, trying to go the extra mile to really crush them and put them down. Well, why is it not a good idea to do this? There's obviously many reasons, but one of the reasons is if you're in a conflict with someone and you go out of your way, even when, of course, if someone is attacking you and you judge them to be a major threat to you, it's recommended that you defend yourself. It's certainly smart and moral to defend yourself when somebody attacks you. But once you've defended yourself and the person is no longer a threat, why try to crush them and put them down even more? Because one, of course, it's just immoral to do this. Another reason is that when you go out of your way to be vindictive and to crush people and to put people down and to break their spirit, what happens is that those things also have an effect on you. A good example of this is, I think maybe 1 year ago, I was taking a class, and the class was talking about colonialism, about Europeans going to Africa. And at the time when they went to colonize Africa, they did all sorts of atrocious things. There's some parts in the Congo where I think the Belgians actually cut off people's hands, and they mutilate them, treat them so badly, right? And what we learned from the text we're reading in that class was the idea that one would think that the only people that suffered from this were the Africans that had their hands cut off and they were being tortured and basically being treated like slaves. But that's not true, because when you cause suffering to others, you also experience suffering yourself. So what we ended up realizing in that class was that, look, the colonizer who came and was mistreating the Africans and causing them suffering also suffered. They suffered psychologically, because there is something about human beings that is contrary, that goes against causing harm to others. When you cause harm to others, you're working against your nature, contrary to your nature. And that's why you feel emotional repercussions from it. When you yell at someone and scream at them, usually you feel the effects in your body. There's an uneasiness. In my case, I feel a tightening in the chest, but you probably have your own physical ramifications, consequences of doing harm to others. But sometimes, obviously, you have to do harm, because if someone is attacking you, let's say someone comes to your house and is trying to attack your mother, well, let's say physically with a knife, well, you're going to need to defend your mother. And it's possible that in self-defense, you might cause harm to whoever was attacking your mother. Maybe he came to stab her and you had a gun, you shot him and he died. Okay. Is this a good event? No. Would we want you to have shot the person? No, but you had to defend yourself. You had to defend your mother. But if you've, let's say, subdued the guy is no longer a threat. Let's say the police came and they caught the guy, and the guy is no longer a threat. But then you pick up a gun and shoot him in the head anyway. See, that's going excessive. That is not being fair and generous in conflict. And that has emotional repercussions in you, because if you cause sadness to someone else, you experience a sadness. And in turn, anybody who associates with you experiences sadness as well. And the people that you made sad will send sadness to others. So one negative, vindictive act from you has ripple effects. And the way the world is connected today, it has ripple effect on another continent. So it's important to sometimes there's a sense in which life is conflict, and conflicts happen. But you want to be the sort of person that is able to, even when you face conflicts, to do what you can to defend yourself from the conflict if you decide that's the best course of action, but not to go out of your way to crush people's spirits, to break them down, to destroy them when they're no longer a threat to you. And we've looked at many reasons for this. Another major reason why it's not a good idea to be vindictive and try to crush people is the fact that you're a relentless man. A relentless man is a leader. What does that mean? A leader uplifts people. A leader makes people better. A leader is the sort of person who makes sure that when he interacts with people, the people are better and feel happier having been around him than not having been around him. He's supposed to empower people, uplift people, not crush them and destroy them and make sure they're completely broken in spirit. That is not the role of a relentless man, because it goes contrary to you realizing your emotional and social potential. And your spiritual potential, by the way, because your true nature is love. And when you do harm to others, especially deliberately when they have not attacked you or anything unnecessarily, you're working contrary to your nature. And you feel the consequences, the depression, the pain, the sadness, the meanness. You feel like something has taken over, and it's because you're not working in accordance with your true nature. All right, we've gone too far on this. So I think I'm going to have to stop this here. Thank you very much for listening to this episode. Please remember that this is your podcast and I'm your servant. My mission in life, the reason I was born, was to help men die empty, to help present you with the ideas that you need to have in order to realize for yourself who you are. Because I know that once you figure out who you are, you become unstoppable and you're able to solve the problems you are born to solve on the planet. And as I've been mentioning in the previous episodes, the world is filled with problems. We have hunger, people dying of starvation. We have corrupt political governments. We have people who have broken spirits, people who are living below their potential. That's a problem to solve. We have economic problems, right? Our economy is not the best it can be. Maybe you could solve our economic crisis. We have an entire continent, like the African continent, that is having a serious crisis of leadership. You can count on your hands how many good leaders we have on the African continent. Of course, not on your hands, but the point is that there are very few good leaders, let's say, on the African continent. The African continent needs leadership. Well, maybe you're an African already, or you're in a position to, or it's a passion of yours to change the leadership on the African continent. That's a big problem. The continent is big, but that's a problem that you can solve. It's very possible right now that you don't believe that. You look at yourself and you look at what you've accomplished in your life up to this point and you think, there is no way I can solve these big problems. I mean, I can't even feed myself. How the heck am I going to feed half of the world? Okay, I never got a college degree. How the heck am I going to educate 2 million people? You look at it and it looks impossible and you don't believe it's possible. Well, I want you to know that I believe in you. In fact, I would never make this podcast episodes if I did not believe in you. You have it within you and you need to realize your true nature. What you are is nothing short of remarkable. You're not weak, you're strong. You're not stupid, you're intelligent. You're not a coward, you're actually courageous. You're not uncreative, you have infinite creativity within you. And I can only tell you these things, but you have to realize that that is truly who you are. And what you can accomplish is limitless. And part of my duty, and that's my duty, is to present you with the ideas to enable you to realize who you are so that you can maximize your potential, die empty, and transform the entire world. You have it within yourself to do that sort of thing. And that's what I'm here for. So in particular, if you're facing, if there's any obstacle in your life, if you have any questions, if there's anything that is troubling you, that is related to you realizing your true potential and dying empty, please let me know about it. My email is in the episode description. It will give me great pleasure to think about whatever it is that is holding you back or whatever questions you have about dying empty. After all, that's why I was born. And it brings me great pleasure to tackle and think about these problems. Thank you very much once again for listening to this podcast episode and have a relentless week. Bye.